less than nothing, just look at us now. In the arms of peace, we long to sleep. We'll rest tonight. When you lay beside me, I know everything's gonna be alright tonight. Could have been stranded, but we made it out of that town, baby, just in time. All these years we thought we had it down, but it was just a foolish stray. It's okay, and it's alright. This graceful life.
Thank you for joining me today, and I'm blessed and honored, actually, to have as my guest Jean Thomas Gomulka. Correct?
Right.
Jean is a sexual abuse victims advocate, investigative reporter, and screenwriter. Wow, you're a screenwriter, really? For what, TV, movies?
Well, I just finished one entitled "Broken Vows."
Ooh,
It's a full-length feature movie.
wow, okay. And let's see, and former seminary formatter and instructor with an STL. What's an STL?
That's a licentiate in sacred theology.
Okay.
That's a European type of degree. It's like a year beyond the master's.
Okay.
Sorry,
From the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. That's the Angelicum, right?
yes, exactly.
Okay. Former Navy chaplain, captain, and member of the U.S. Marine Corps Inspector General team, ordained a priest for the Altoona Johnstown Diocese, and later made a prelate of honor, Monsignor, by St. Pope John Paul II. Wow. Thank you, Jean, for joining me. God bless you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your program, Joseph.
Oh, thank you. I became aware of your work a while ago. I encourage people to go to Jean's website, and I'll link it in the show's description. I wanted to cover today mainly this document that Jean has posted for free on the internet, so you can read it on his website. Anything that's more complicated than like a 1 or 2 page article, I usually print out. So I did print out this, and it's, gosh, I was reading this over the last few days, and it's thorough. It's documented. I went to UC Berkeley, and my degree's in history, so I understand footnoting and I understand documenting of sources. And you did a very good job of that, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you.
My book has like 300 footnotes, so this is really well researched, and this is just thankless work. I'm telling you, I'm thanking you. But because I've done not as extensive or as thorough as this, but I've done some looking into the problem of pre-sex abuse and the cover-up in the Catholic Church, and it's just work that I think I did just out of love. I think just out of love for the survivors and the victims, and just a hope and a prayer that no one else will have to suffer as other people have and as I have. So I just wanted to ask you first, that's a big question. What inspired you to do this kind of work? Because it's very, like I said, it's thankless work, and it's not pleasant work either.
No, well, it is and it isn't. I mean, for me, it's fulfilling, but there are times when I just, at the end of the day, I say to myself, I need a drink, just need to relax, because it can be very depressing because of the egregious nature of so many of these abuse cases. And but what really, I think, started me off was when I was first ordained. I was assigned to a parish in Penn State, in State College, Pennsylvania. And the pastor, Monsignor Fleming, put me in charge of the altar boys. And I had about 80 altar boys. It's a large parish. By the time I left State College 5 years later, we were up to about 170. And I loved those kids like they were my own children. And the reason was, too, my classmates from college, were getting married, having families, having children. And as a priest, I was not allowed to marry and have a family and children. So those children, those servers, those altar boys were very, very, very important in my life. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them. Just last week, I drove 3.5 hours north of you, to Ventura. Or no, you're in San Francisco.
Right.
Well, it was south of you, about 3.5 hours north of here, to attend the retirement ceremony of one of my former altar boys that I met when he was 10 years old. He's just finished 37 years of governmental and military service, and asked me to speak at his retirement, and said that I was the one who motivated him, to join the Navy and so forth. So my point is that my close relationship with those young men that I still maintain to this day made me feel that whenever I hear about an abuse case where someone comes to me and relates abuse in their life, I think of those victims as if they were like my own children. And I think it was such a blessing for me at that stage of my development as a young priest to have those kinds of relationships and experiences, which I really regret young priests today cannot have, because they can't even be alone, with Billy and Bobby without an adult being present. And they can't develop those kind of mentoring relationships, that I enjoyed. So that's what motivated me to do this work is my love for those kids. And you have to understand, too, there were two other young associates in that parish with me, one for 4 years and one for 1 year. Both of those young associates, my own age, we discovered years later, without my knowledge or the knowledge of the pastor, were hitting on my altar boys, were abusing them. Now, both of those priests are out of ministry today, but the damage was done. So, but you see, the other problem too is when I look at those two young priests that I served with, I regret what they did, but at the same time, I pity those priests, because both of those priests, unlike myself, who went to a co-ed Catholic high school in Johnstown, both of those priests who were abusing those young men, both of them were products of high school seminaries. And so during their period of psychosexual development, they were being groomed. They were being groomed by the faculty members, by upperclassmen, and they had no idea, that this grooming was a form of abuse.
Yes.
And because of that, years later now, when they become priests, they tried the same thing with other young men, the same age that they were when they were groomed. Only now to find out that not all of these young men like that. So the Catholic Church created, even before the whole LGBTQ movement came about, the Catholic Church was very much involved in creating sexual predators in these high school seminaries. And that is why you have so many bishops today, and cardinals and archbishops, who were products of those seminaries. And that's why today more than half of the priests and the bishops are homosexuals.
Yeah. You just outlined pretty much everything I wanted to talk to you about. Thank you. Yeah. Now, those high school seminaries, they used to be called minor seminaries, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, I wasn't around when they were functioning, but I suppose that if a young man in Catholic school or maybe in public school showed any sort of inclination towards the priesthood or towards spirituality or religious bent, they were sort of picked out or plucked out and put into a minor seminary. Is that how it functioned?
Well, it did. As a matter of fact, interestingly, when I was in 8th grade, I had two models in my life: my brother, who was in the Navy, and the young priest who's just assigned to our Polish parish, Father Bernard Przewocki.
Wow.
And I told my parents, I said, Mom and Dad, I think I want to be a priest like Father Bernard. I'd like to go away to the seminary after I graduate from grade school.
Right.
So I wanted to go to St. Mary's College in Orchard Lake, Michigan, for their high school program, St. Cyril Methodius, So fortunately, my brother was home on leave from the Navy at that same time. And my brother's sitting at table listening to this conversation, and he says, no way is he going to go away to some seminary. He's too young to know, that he's able, if he wants to give up having a wife and children. Let him go to the high school here. And if he's still inclined to do that, let him decide later on. He's too young to make that decision at this point in his life. And my parents, fortunately, agreed with my brother. And
Smart brother.
And I said, okay, no problem. I'll go to Bishop McCourt.
Yeah, I read that in one of your articles, and it was smart brother. So
yeah.
I want to talk about I kind of wanted the focus of our discussion, if it's all right with you, is grooming, because I think you talked about it in your articles, but the issue of grooming is also sort of in mainstream media right now because of the so-called Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. And I think there's some confusion, especially surprisingly among Roman Catholics, about what grooming actually is. I just wanted to say that stranger abductions are something that people, I think, are familiar with, and they do occur. But most often, people who are children, or even adults and vulnerable adults who are sexually abused, are abused by someone that they know. Since the focus of your writing, at least in this instance, was seminarians, let's talk about seminarians. I mean, I have spoken with seminarians, and I've also just spoken with pre-sex abuse survivors who are not in a seminary. None of them, I'm being hyperbolic here, but none of them were walking down the street and a priest, grabbed them, threw them in a van, and sexually abused them. They were groomed. They knew their abuser. A lot of times they knew their abuser quite well. So I wanted to talk specifically about how the grooming process takes place. I think you very rightly connect a lot of the priest abuse problem in the Catholic Church with homosexuality, because the majority of victims have been males, post-pubescent males. Now, I have talked with, and I was abused, by a Catholic priest who very much, I wouldn't say used, but utilized, sexual orientation in terms of the grooming process. And that's been the story with a lot of survivors that I have spoken with. And because I think there's a false meme or a false belief out there, especially sadly with some victims groups, and I don't know why they've taken this stance. It's sort of a political position, but I'm curious to what you think about this, is that some Catholics and, lay Catholics and clergy believe that a number of priests were just opportunistic abusers, that they abused whoever was available. And their argument is that boys were more available than girls. But I've spoken with female survivors of pre-sex abuse, and their abusers abused females, and they had no problem accessing victims. So that argument has always rung false to me, that it's that the preponderance of male victims is only because of opportunistic abusers. I don't think it's true. I know there was a lot in that. It wasn't really questioned, but there was a lot in that statement. So,
well, people like Supich, with whom I studied in Rome,
right.
and others who advance that argument, you have to understand too, do not want to talk about homosexuality because it's too close to their own existence. So you have to understand, you have to consider the source of the people who are making these arguments. For example, Supich and even the Pope himself would say, well, there's no relationship between homosexuality and pedophilia, that there is many people who are pedophiles who are abusing boys as there are girls. That is true. But the problem in the Catholic Church with regard to clerical abuse has nothing to do, very little, less than 10% of the victims are prepubescent children. The real problem in the Roman Catholic Church, as is the case also, for example, in the Boy Scouts of America, involves phebophilia, the sexual abuse of post-adolescent, post-pubescent children. So they're basically hitting on teenage boys, and it's the man-boy relationship. And that's why I sent you those studies, even from the gay community, that showed that about 73% of homosexuals have admitted, to having come on to a teenage boy in their life. So that temptation is acting out. But going back to what you said about the grooming, you have to understand too that, as you're absolutely right, very few of those young men who were preyed upon were even in their own minds set up as if they were abused. They were groomed, and when you talk about most of them being friends, from my own even experience at the North American College in Rome, I was approached twice. Two seminarians, upperclassmen, came on to me, and interestingly, both of those young men were part of my small group of, let's say, if I had identified 10 best friends in Rome at that time at the North American College, these two were part of that 10 best friends. So while I'm working on my final exam, studying it's hot, the windows open, my shirt's off, who comes into my room? But one of my friends starts massaging my chest.
No.
And I threw him out, But again, and the other one who tried another act, both of these young men, I perceived at the time, I thought they were my very, very good friends. I didn't realize that, they wanted to befriend me because they wanted something else out of me. At that point, when you're young, handsome, good looking, whatever, you're a target. And so you'll find that many of my victims, I find very interestingly, are when you look at the pictures of these seminarians.
What do you mean, Gene, by my victims?
Well, the victims that I deal with. Okay, in other words, those people like the one young man I'm working with now who was drugged and sodomized by his pastor, and others who were harmed. I call them my victims in the sense that I'm their advocate.
Sorry to interrupt you. In what capacity are you advocating for them? As
well, what I do is, it's a number of things. One, sometimes I will help them find an attorney that may take on their case. Sometimes I will write an article and publish it about their case. Sometimes I will try to work behind the scenes with people. Right now, for example, I'm working in a case involving the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Now, I'm working with a friend with whom I studied with in Rome, who's a member of who's in a position of authority within that church, to try to handle this at the lowest level possible and get the priest who came on to this young man, seminarian, and have him removed from ministry. But if they don't cooperate, then we have to go to another level. Then I have a lawyer in Stamford, Connecticut, where that seminary is located, who will then possibly take on this case. So that's what I do. I basically work with attorneys. I also work with investigators if I don't investigate it myself.
Thank God for you. Wow. Thank you, Lord. You were at the North American College, the NAC in Rome, right?
From 1971 to 75. I went there in my second year of theology after doing first theology in St. Francis Seminary in Loretto, Pennsylvania. Then I was ordained in 74, returned to Rome to complete my licentiate in sacred theology at the Angelicum.
And that sort of predation was going on at that time at the seminary.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, if you consider it, two friends came on to me, and then you have to understand too.
I'd say that's predation.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you have to understand. Remember I told you there were two priests in the parish that I was stationed with, who later on we found out. Well, guess what? One of those priests was my classmate who I studied with in Rome. In other words, we were ordained together. The bishop laid his hands on me, and then a minute later, he laid his hands on Bob, who was then I was later on, I returned to Rome. Then I came back and was assigned to the same parish he was assigned to in State College. And so then years later, he returned at the request of the rector, Monsignor Edwin O'Brien, to be the academic dean of the North American College, where he never completed his tour. And then later on, it was revealed that he was relieved because of sexual problems.
Gene, did you ever report that unwanted advance while you were there at the college? Did you?
Well, when Otto came into my room and did that, it happened so fast. I said, "Get out of here!" So at the time, I didn't, like a lot of victims who, at the time it happens, you're sort of like, what's going on here? And so because he never tried it again or whatever, I'm wondering, look, is a seminary like a prison, where there's no women and you're doing things in showers that you would not ordinarily do so I didn't know at the time, but interestingly, I discovered years later, when I Googled him, I found out that shortly after he was ordained, that he was accused of abusing a young man because he was from Brooklyn. But the case was dismissed because they didn't have enough evidence against him. Then later on, Bishop DiMarzio, his bishop in Brooklyn, put him in charge of sex abuse.
Great.
He was in charge of the Safe Environment Program. It's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house, So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with people, and I've seen this in many, many, many dioceses. It's happened, same thing with Regali in St. Louis, where he put Timothy Dolan, when he made him his auxiliary bishop, in charge of abuse, so that when Chris O'Leary, who was abused by Father Valentine, came to auxiliary Bishop Dolan and said, "Hey, I'm here because you know that Father Valentine, who lived with you in the rectory, was abusing me." "Oh, I don't know that." And so, in other words, you put people in charge, oftentimes of the Safe Environment Program, who are there basically to prevent people from bringing suit and discouraging them and trying to talk them into believing that what happened to them was just in their mind. It never really happened in real life.
Yeah. Sorry to go back to this again, but I'm interested in the dynamics of what goes on in a seminary. But after that fellow seminarian made that advance, did you talk to anybody about it? I mean, any fellow
No,
seminarian?
I never mentioned it. You see, a lot of victims, will wait, 10, 20, 30 years. Because you see, at the time that it happens, you're trying to figure out what was really going on there. Was this really a sexual act, or was this just horsing around? You don't know, because you want to give this person maybe the benefit of the doubt. Because in this case, now had he reached for my privates, that would have been different. But
that's how grooming begins. It begins.
Oh, absolutely, it does. It's the massage, that, and that's the same thing that happened with former seminarian Anthony Gorgia at the North American College, where he witnessed Father Adam Park of the Archdiocese of Washington, ordained by Theodore McCarrick, doing that to one of a fellow seminarian, who then later on came up back to Gorgia and said, "Well, I noticed you witnessed what he was doing. I don't like what he's doing. And it really disturbs me." And then when Gorgia spoke with other seminarians, they also related that they felt the Park was kind of strange and maybe a predator.
Yeah, I want to talk about that case later too. It's tragic. So in the beginning of your study here, I think you're pretty methodical. Well, you're pretty methodical in all the points you're trying to make. And you argue that the majority of priests are homosexual, either by inclination or behavior. So, and then I can testify to this point that I think in certain religious orders, I would say the percentage of homosexual priests is higher than in the diocesan priesthood. I'm going to say the Jesuits, the Paulists, and the OFMs.
Absolutely. All the studies show that.
Yep.
And the people, when you speak with Jesuits, for example, Father Paul Shaughnessy is a Jesuit priest. We served together in the military. And before I came out with my article addressing this problem in America Magazine, he published an article in the New Catholic World in which he lamented the deaths of many of his brother Jesuits who were dying of AIDS. And when that article came out, he was called in by then Archbishop O'Brien, who was in charge of the military archdiocese, and he was threatened with being thrown out of the military if he ever wrote about that again. Because you see, again, it touched a nerve, because O'Brien, like many bishops, today, are homosexuals.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, Gene, how I got interested in this topic is I got it personally involved because I was born and raised here in San Francisco. It's very liberal, and the Catholic Church has always been very leftist here. So, I was groomed and molested by a Catholic priest when I was 16. And then, not unusual is that I want to talk about that with you later, a number of men who are sexually abused by Catholic priests later come out as gay.
Yes.
I have to say the majority of survivors that are male that I have spoken to now identify as gay. It's just another tragic piece of the puzzle. And then when I moved to San Francisco and lived as a gay man, I met several priests, Catholic priests, who were homosexual and actively homosexual. And I always thought that, and then I left that life, and for some inexplicable reason, I returned to the Catholic Church. But I always thought that this gay problem, if you want to call it that, in the Catholic priesthood was sort of endemic to San Francisco, certain dioceses. It was just, it wasn't something, it was very local. That's what I thought. And then I started writing about some of my experiences, and people Catholics began to write me from all around the United States, how specifically, not so much that they had been sexually abused or that family members had been sexually abused, but that they themselves or people that they knew or people in their family, what I would call had been groomed in these LGBTQ ministries that are in every major diocese and in some smaller ones. I guess at that point, my eyes were wide open and I was like, well, this is a bigger problem than in San Francisco. That there, and I don't know if these priests are necessarily identify as gay or that they participate in homosexual behavior, but they're certainly promoting, LGBT activism, and they're activists. And I was like, wow, this is a big problem. And every time I went down these rat holes where I tried to research or something about a parish, it was always a Jesuit. I always found a Jesuit, even if it wasn't so much a Jesuit parish. There was always some sort of Jesuit connection. And I kind of traced it back because of my background as history. I traced it back to John J. McNeill, the famous Jesuit in the 1970s who wrote the Church and the Homosexual, and was really one of the first, I guess you could say, like celebrity priests who went on mainstream media and talked about all these things. And then I found it interesting that it wasn't that long ago, in 2001, you actually wrote an article for America, which is the Jesuit, owned and operated magazine. And now the Jesuits, 21 years later, they've gone full LGBTQ activist. So, I mean, this sort of article would never run.
Oh,
now.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
It's fascinating.
That article got me in a lot of trouble, you have to understand.
With the Jesuits, or who
the problem, it got me into trouble with Archbishop O'Brien, the gay, military archbishop, who interestingly was actually the force behind my writing that article. You see, what happened was O'Brien contacted me because I had just received the Alfred Thayer Mahan Award for my literary works in the military. And he said, well, you're a reputed writer now, an author and so forth. How about doing an article for me in the Priest magazine promoting the chaplaincy? I said, sure. So I wrote an article in the Priest magazine. But then as soon as I finished that, and it was published, I thought, well, I said all the great things that are going on, but I didn't say about some of the problems we have too. So I decided to have a more balanced perspective on chaplaincy and so forth. I decided to pen an article for America, and I'd been published like 3 times before that in America on other issues. So having written for America in the past, especially in regard to like the pre-shortage issue and so forth, I thought they may accept it. And they did. Only when O'Brien read it, he didn't look at it from the perspective of my encouraging people to be supportive of their priests who are now living alone, home alone in the priesthood. They saw it from the perspective of where I used that example of the 5 priests in the military who got in trouble, where I said living alone can cause you to be tempted in ways that, if you had a wife and kids, you would not be tempted.
Right.
In other words, if you're married, you have a wife and kids, are you going to bring a prostitute to your home? I don't think so. So in the end, when I wrote that article, that was right after that appeared. That's when I got a phone call from a chaplain friend who said, I know someone who's not going to be a bishop now.
Exactly.
So no, I mean, it was the Jesuits absolutely have a very serious problem. And who is the number 1 Jesuit in the world today?
James Martin.
No.
Francis. I'm sorry.
Yes. And so if you look at history, but you see, I mean, of course, the American media has given him a pass. They do not want to look critically at Francis. So that, for example, we know that when he wrote in his book In Heaven and Earth, he wrote that there in his entire time in the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires, it has 2.7 million Catholics. He said there was not one case of abuse. I mean, if you're going to lie well.
Yeah,
but so we know, and so all the people who were interviewed, even videos that are available on YouTube, sex abuse in the church, the Code of Silence, those productions interview people from Buenos Aires who document how Francis, when he was the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, covered up all of their abuse. Now, covering up that abuse, so we know that he covered up abuse. But what people do not know, and that is, if somebody is going to reveal something, they have to be careful of the ramifications. And one of the aspects of my job in terms of being an investigative reporter involves talking with sources and people. And at this point, I still would not write about this, but I could share it with you in that I have had conversations with someone who said that he spoke with someone who attests to having been, in Cordoba in Argentina when Bergoglio was sexually involved with a seminarian.
Wow.
Now, but what made that a little more credible was the fact that the person was able to identify the time, the place, and even the former seminarian who he is alleged to have sodomized. So if that's true, then you might understand too why McCarrick was able to get around the way he did, because you see, McCarrick, after Francis was elected, flew down to Buenos Aires with a priest from the seminary in Washington that he was living with. He was living in a Hispanic seminary there after he retired. And he went down to Argentina. And if in fact, if he uncovered that information that I was given about Francis in Cordoba, that might help explain why he was able then to do everything he wanted to, and also why he was laicized. Because you see, canonically speaking, I don't know if you know this, most Catholics don't, but if a cardinal gets in serious trouble,
right,
only the Pope can preside at a trial of a cardinal.
I did know that.
Now, let's pretend, Joseph, that you're the Pope and I'm Cardinal McCarrick. Now, if I know that you were into seminarians in Cordoba, like I was into seminarians in Newark, in New Jersey, then how? And if you know that I know what you were into, how can you stand in judgment of me? Because if you try to stand in judgment with me in a trial, I'll say, well, who are you to tell me when you did the same thing in Cordoba?
Right.
So that's why you see, I believe McCarrick was laicized, because once you're laicized, then there's no trial. Do you avoid the trial? You just get rid of the guy.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, when you brought up the issue of Jesuits, you were right on. And two, if you see who the Pope has surrounded himself with in the Casa Santa Marta in the Vatican, you'll find that a lot of those people that he's living with are known active homosexuals, like the person in charge of it, Monsignor Batista Rica, who, while he was in Uruguay, was found to be living with Patrick, a Swiss man who he had a relationship with. Then later on, he was caught in an elevator with a gay prostitute, and then later on was beaten up in a gay park. Now,
Park, yeah.
This is the guy that the Pope has put in charge of his household. So what does that say?
Says a lot.
Well, all I'm telling you, Joseph, is if you get invited to visit the Pope,
I wouldn't go.
Make sure you lock your door at night.
I wouldn't go. I wouldn't even go. The thing that I found fascinating about you, being published in America in 2001, because I've tried to wrap my head around. There's so much that's difficult when you're researching the Catholic Church. I don't know, it's very difficult. Like, say, with John J. McNeil, the famous gay priest, he would later marry his partner, but I could never actually determine his status in the Jesuits. Was he? I couldn't figure it out. Was he still a Jesuit? I didn't know. It was very difficult, and I read a lot of sources, and then I found it, fascinating that in 2001, the Jesuits published you. And I'm thinking back because I knew gay Jesuits, and it wasn't, their homosexuality and their behavior was certainly known among their fellow Jesuits, but I don't think it was widely advertised. And I don't remember them being outspoken gay advocates. Certainly among their parishioners, they were known as being pro-gay or gay affirmative, because I attended same-sex weddings that were officiated by these men. But I mean, over the last 20 years, I mean, the Jesuits have become very public in their stance and support for gay causes. But it almost sort of mirrors the advancement that, I don't know if you want to say advancement, but that the progression that it's made in the secular society. I mean, within the last 20 years, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were not pro-gay marriage. They weren't. So, I mean, their views changed pretty quickly. And then you have the Jesuits. I mean, I would say, symbolized by James Martin, being very, very pro-gay and publicly so, advocating for everything acceptance of homosexual behavior, even gay marriage in the church. And I have the Germans jumping on board. And I wonder if that had a lot to do with Francis, because I think you made an interesting argument in this article too. I'm trying to tie this all together. Is that there was a meme, and I don't think it was popular. I don't think it's popular now. I don't know how anybody could make that claim, but certainly in Pope John Paul's papacy and in Benedict's, is that this gay problem in the Catholic Church, it's just going to be solved by sort of attrition. That was sort of, the Paul VI, era priests, and they're dying off and they're leaving. But I don't, because you make the argument that it's going to actually increase.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It has to.
And I think that's correct, because I think what I've seen in certain religious orders, and you talk about this in here, is that they do actively recruit among homosexuals. And this is interesting because a lot of these gay affirmative religious orders, like the Paulists and the Jesuits, have these ministries, and they actually recruit vocations from these ministries. And then you have just the problem in the diocese where, and you mentioned all of the, I don't know if you mentioned all of them, but you mentioned the very pro-gay bishops who were connected with McCarrick. We're talking about Wilton Gregory and McElroy and Kupich. And I'd say certainly that the gay problem in the priesthood is going to get worse under them.
It will. And that's why I maintain too that the percentage of gays is higher. If you continue going up, the highest percentage are going to be in the cardinals, then the archbishops, then the bishops, then the priests, the seminaries, because I maintain that because, look, pretend you're my bishop and you're gay, okay? And you know that I'm gay. And we're friends. You're going to make me your secretary. And then you're going to make me maybe your vicar general or put me in charge of your seminary. And then when it comes time to nominating people to become bishops, you're going to name me. Now, if I'm another priest and I'm straight, and I'm really straight, and I don't buy this, gay stuff, because I see these guys like my classmates who were threats to my altar boys, and I think what they're doing, they should all be locked up. Well, if you're gay and you know that I have a strong stand in defense of these kids who are being abused that you're covering up for, you're not going to make me anywhere. You're going to keep me far, far away. So my point is that gay bishops are making gay priest bishops, and the gay bishops are being made gay archbishops by gay cardinals, and it just keeps going on and on and on. So, but what's also happening, because people like Anthony Gorgia, these other seminarians, former seminarians who I'm representing, when they object to this, they're gotten rid of. And you see, when you get rid of the straight guys, who are you left with? And that's why I maintain that not only will the percentage of gays in the priesthood and the episcopacy continue to increase, but at the same time, anyone who's familiar with the difference in partnering between heterosexuals and homosexuals, knowing that homosexual men have far more sex partners than heterosexual men, will know then that you have to anticipate that by ordaining all of these homosexuals, you have to stand by for more and more of them. Especially if 73% of them, have been known to come on to young men, you have to anticipate that you will continue to have some of these homosexual priests and bishops coming on to young men and vulnerable seminarians.
Now, a lot of gay affirmative priests and the LGBT Catholic activists would say, well, so what that a cardinal's gay? So what that a bishop is gay? So what that priests are gay? That doesn't mean that they are going to be abusers, because just like a heterosexual priest, they are, committed to the vow of celibacy. So what that they're gay? That's the argument that they would make. What it's interesting is Richard Syke, the priest, and I never got to talk to him. I wish I would have, but he always made the argument that celibacy was the problem in the priesthood, and I've kind of gone back and forth with that in my head, because these priests who do have a homosexual inclination and do act out, they're not being celibate, and then that secretive nature of the vow of celibacy, and then you lay on top. I don't want to use that analogy, and then you layer on top of that the admonitions against homosexuality in the Catholic Church that you are officially proclaimed. Then you've got two things that they have to be secretive about. So, I mean, what do you think about that? That the argument that they say it's not the issue of homosexuals in the priesthood, but it's celibacy.
I personally believe, based upon all of my research, and remember, I talked with Richard Syke before he died. He was my neighbor here, 20 minutes away. I live in Coronado. He lived here in La Jolla. Okay.
Oh, beautiful.
And of course, as you know, he's a good friend. He was a good friend of Tom Doyle, who also is a friend of mine. And so, we're running in the same circles. Okay. I believe both of those issues are correct. In other words, I believe there is a relationship between the number of homosexuals in the priesthood, which has led to predation, and that, remember, was confirmed too by Father Paul Sullins in his research at Catholic University. He showed very, very clearly, how the number of cases of abuse rose as the percentage of gays in the priesthood increased. Okay? So I believe that's true. So I discount those who say there's no relationship. But with regard to celibacy being the issue too, I agree with that insofar as let's take the example of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Okay, now as you know, the Ukrainians came back after the Orthodoxy. And they don't like the term unions, but they came back, to join the Catholic Church. And they were allowed they came back on the condition that they would not be forced to accept celibacy, which was introduced in the Roman Catholic Church after the East and the West divided, right? And now, so they always had a married clergy. But then you see, when they started immigrating to the United States, the American bishops, mainly who are of Irish background, got the Vatican to approve of a decree basically saying that they were not allowed to practice their priesthood outside of their homeland if they're married.
Oh, jeez.
So what that meant was that that the Ukrainian Church and the Catholic Church in the United States for years was basically made up of Eastern Rite priests who were forced to accept celibacy. Now, if they wanted to marry, they could go back, to the Ukraine or whatever. But if they're in the United States, they had to accept that. Well, interestingly, what I found in my research now, I'm getting more and more cases involving Ukrainians in the United States who are homosexuals. But that is not true in Canada. You see, Canada did not enforce that celibacy thing for them. So most of the priests, Ukrainian priests in Canada today, are married. So on the issue of celibacy, in other words, the celibacy requirement for the Ukrainian priest has given rise to a number of the priests now in the United States who are Ukrainian being homosexuals and engaging in sexual predation. That does not exist in Canada with the married priest. Now, you can understand that too when you go back to the minor seminaries, right? Minor seminaries, they were being hit on by those priests, right? Who are on the faculty. But guess what? If you were in a high school and you went to a military academy, why weren't you hit on like that, like all these seminarians were? Well, because a lot of the faculty members on those military academies in high school were married. They had wives and kids. So they're not going to hit on their cadets. So the bottom line is this. I really believe that the problem is twofold. So it's not one or the other. It's both celibacy and it's the relationship between homosexuality and ephebophilia.
Yeah. And I that's fascinating. I agree with you. And then the other argument they'll make is that, well, the majority of sexual abusers are heterosexual men, but also the majority of the population are heterosexual men. It's growing, but they do inflate the number of gay men. It's probably about 2% of the population.
If they say the majority, yes, the majority of sex abuse victims in the United States are women. And right. So they're being sexual, they're being raped and so forth by heterosexuals.
Correct.
Right. But not in the Catholic Church.
Correct.
Right. The majority of the victims again are teenage males. Right. And that is the very, very important distinction that even the John Jay study refused to acknowledge the relationship between that and ephebophilia, because they in the John Jay study in some cases voiced the same argument that Supich did by saying, well, there's no relationship between homosexuality and ephebophilia. So you have to understand, you have to discuss when they set this up. You have to be able to discuss this in an intelligent way and cut through, what in many cases is a smokescreen.
Yeah, you take apart large sections of the John Jay report, and I appreciated that. I want to get and you tackled this question in your writing, and I kind of wanted to explore it a little more. what is the incentive for, let's say, a gay man to enter the priesthood? And I think before, let's say, I don't know what date to put it. I don't know. But let's say before the sexual revolution in the 70s, or the declassification of homosexuality in 1973 from the DSM. I think there was the incentive for a gay man to enter the priesthood. What it was a sort of cover, a sort of beard. I mean, what else were you going to do? I mean, in prior generations, people were expected to marry. Not that many people just had a career. So a young man from a Catholic family, if he had same-sex attraction, never wanted to marry, he would enter the priesthood. And
Sure.
it was a way in which to be around other men, I guess, in a chaste sort of way. And you kind of talk about that in your paper, where you could be in an all-male environment, and the question of your sexual orientation would sort of disappear. But now that is no longer an issue. I mean, I know many men who are, I mean, me included, many men who are raised Catholic, and there isn't a stigma in the Catholic Church at all around homosexuality. And I'm kind of not sure what the argument you make is. I think I kind of know which one I would make. What is the incentive now for, let's say, a homosexual man to enter the priesthood? I think it is it specifically in certain religious orders. I think there's a possibility to be gay in forms of your identity, and to be open about it, but also to be sexually active with other priests. And it's also, especially certain religious orders, the Jesuits, for example, it's a prestigious position. My friend John Zmirak, who I love from The Stream, he made this argument that, I'm kind of paraphrasing him, John, but he has such a great sense of humor. But he said, like, it draws gay men who were too dumb for the Democratic Party and too untalented for Broadway. So it's sort of a pool. And I have to say, I kind of agree with it, because I met priests who were gay when I was actively gay. And I don't know what place they would belong in the wider gay male community. They were sort of awkward. And so I could see that the priesthood is attractive because, it's prestigious, and you have ritual and ceremony, and it's a place of honor that is a lot of times bequeathed, not because of accomplishment, just because of you're given it as a position by God, supposedly.
Well, I think that there's various motivations, okay? I would be very hesitant to identify just one, because then I would be insulting others who don't have that motivation. For example, I'm involved in a case right now with a young man.
I'm sorry, Gene, I'm just talking about homosexuals.
Right, I know.
Okay.
This young man I'm dealing with is a homosexual, okay?
Okay.
He was abused, okay? But he went into the gay life, but he didn't like it, It was very dangerous and it wasn't fulfilling. And then he came back to the church, okay?
Sounds like me.
And then he decided he wanted to join an oratory. He wanted to be a priest, but he wanted to be celibate. He did not want, to be sexually active. Okay.
Gene, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Should the church be accepting these people? I don't think they should. Not in terms of any theological point. I just think that they're open to grooming and abuse, more susceptible.
Well, and that was what actually happened to him, you see, because what he did was when he revealed to his pastor, his Ukrainian pastor.
No. Yeah.
And what happened? Oh, so, but then he said, well, don't worry, because the bishop also is gay too.
Run.
So
Run out of there.
But you see, when he reported this pastor coming on to him, they got rid of him. They got rid of him. You know,
the seminarian.
Yes, they got rid of him. And you see, so
no brainer.
What's interesting is, you know, initially a lot of the former seminarians I was dealing with were heterosexuals who were gotten rid of because the rector or whomever was afraid of being outed. So they got rid of him because they got rid of the heterosexual. But at the same time, too, because of the large number of homosexuals in the seminaries, when they come on to a homosexual who turns them down, then they fear they have to get rid of this person too, because that other person also may then, you know, report them. So what I'm saying is that you have to distinguish in the seminaries today people who are going there. There are some who are trying to, you know, I mean, I dealt with one. He was a real story. Okay, he was abused when he was 9 years old by his 15-year-old brother, who was abused by his uncle. Okay, and he's a priest today. Okay, the one who was 9 years old. Okay, who became a homosexual, but because he was abused by his own brother, okay, he's involved in ministry in a particular state, a particular parish, but he is not at all, you know, abusive. I mean, for him to abuse someone would be like doing the same thing would happen to him. So he's the last person, you know, to want to abuse someone. But so if he became a priest, you know, it was not because he was a threat to others. But there are, unfortunately, others who are threats. And what's happened, because once they closed the minor seminaries, you had a large number of men who knew that they were homosexuals, were sexually active, but they wanted, you know, they saw the priesthood as a way to get some income, prestige. They could live in a closet, no one would know, and they could have boyfriends too among the clergy.
Exactly.
And this is where a lot of priests and bishops today, if you look at some of the bishops in the United States, you'll see that a certain number of them worked as, you know, music directors or all kind of different things before they entered the seminary. So a lot of these guys who were gay, but who wanted to hide their, you know, orientation and behavior, became priests. And then they were befriended by the bishops who were gay, who then promoted them to become bishops. So you'll find interestingly, a number of bishops being made today who were delayed vocations and were entered the priesthood basically as a way to live in the closet and to have a comfortable, you know, life, well financed, and here's where we are today. So the problem is those homosexual bishops, however, even if they're not sexually active, okay, the problem is they're still discriminating against the straight guys. They're promoting the gay guys. And so if you work in a company, do you want to work in a company if you're a woman and all the guys are being promoted and you're smarter than they are? No. So that's why you see this problem is having a terrible impact upon the recruitment and the retention of healthy, holy, devout heterosexuals.
I don't know why a straight masculine guy nowadays would want to be a priest. I have no idea. But anyway, would you agree that the majority of homosexual, sexually active priests and bishops in the Catholic Church are not interested in minors? The majority are involved and only interested in adults.
Yes, especially unless they were groomed in minor seminaries. But because a lot of these guys now entered the priesthood after they as adults. In other words, they didn't start off in minor seminaries or even college seminaries.
Okay.
Because a lot of these guys now identify themselves as gay and then enter the seminary, their sexual experience did not involve, teenage boys. Their sexual experiences were always involved with adults.
Right.
So they're going to be much more inclined to sleep with one another. That's why you had these orgies like you had in Springfield in December of 2004.
I read that.
The residence of Bishop.
I can't recall his name either. I don't know.
The current Archbishop of Omaha.
Oh, Lucas.
Yes, George Lucas. So
no relation to
yeah. So so you see, they were basically, other, gay priests in the diocese, and even two of those were co-pastors.
Yeah. Now, I'm not getting confused, but I people listening are getting confused. I think there's kind of two different strains of thought going on here. One is that if you are sexually abused as a child, you could be more likely to sexually abuse as an adult.
Yes. Or not.
Right. The other question is that people who have been sexually abused as children, this has been verified, and with studies, and I think I wrote an article about it. People who are sexually abused as children are more likely to be sexually abused as adults. They're more likely to be repeatedly abused. There's just two different. That's why I'm worried about. I would be worried about anybody that was abused as a child, whether by a priest or anybody, entering a seminary. My worry for them is that they are very likely to be re-abused.
It's a real possibility. I've known people, priests.
They're more likely,
right, who have been abused multiple times, and it's true. I mean, the problem is once that happens in your life. I'm preaching to the choir here. You know how it affects your whole orientation. You're affected by that, and it's very difficult if you've had this experience, if you're abused by a priest, to enter into like a deep, loving, emotional relationship with a woman. Because every time you're thrown back. It's sort of like the woman who was abused by her father as a young girl, and then she gets married, and then her husband wants to make love with her, and she immediately has these flashbacks to what her dad did, so that their sexual relationship is very, very precarious. It may be problematic to the point where they divorce, but if she can, it will only require therapy on her part, and then for her to reveal to her husband what happened to her, that then maybe they can come together. But for the most part, people who suffer sexual trauma, as children, that has a deep, profound effect upon them later on as adults.
Or women, a number of women who are sexually abused as children often end up with abusive partners when they're adults.
Well, they do. And that's why your point is well taken, because you said...
So I'm leading to something.
Okay.
No. But I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to just real quick. These are two studies. The impact of sexual abuse on sexual identity formation in gay men. This is from 2008. Emerging data suggests that as children, gay males have an increased risk for physical and sexual abuse. Anecdotal evidence suggests that a significant subset of children abused by clergy identify as gay as adults. Okay, here's another study. This is comparative data of childhood and adolescent molestation in heterosexual and homosexual persons. 46% of homosexual men, in contrast to 7% of heterosexual men, reported homosexual molestation as children. So we're dealing with two facts here. A number of men who identify as gay were almost a majority were sexually abused as children. A large number of men who later identify as gay were victims of clergy abuse. So it's it's conceivable that a large number of abuse victims are drawn to the priesthood.
Yes, yes. There's a case involving a former seminarian, excuse me, from the North American College, who was abused. He entered the seminary, but then his abuse affected his orientation, and so when he was assigned to a parish, his sexual orientation caused him then to enter into a relationship with a man. Uh-huh. He married that man. Once it was passed in the United States, you could marry. So he married the man. And interestingly, you'll find this interesting. He went to his bishop. And he said, "Bishop, I got to tell you, look, I'm a homosexual. I had this happen to me by this priest in the diocese. He abused me. Then I was ordained, and now I got married." You know what the bishop said to him?
No.
The bishop said to him, "Congratulations. I'm glad. Are you happy? But keep that quiet. Don't let the people know." But then he came back to the bishop later on and said, "Oh, Bishop, by the way, I want to bring suit against the priest in the diocese who abused me." And what did the bishop do? "Oh, we have to send you away for psychological evaluation. You have problems." Because you see, it was okay for him to marry this man and live a double life, to be the pastor of this Catholic church and have this gay, married man on the side. But don't report abuse. Don't say that this priest abused you. So in the end, what happened to him, he left the priesthood. He married the man, and now he lives in Canada. But the thing is that it's inconceivable almost how these bishops cover up all of this abuse and those who are sexually active. They know they're sexually active, but then they still cover up for them.
These two studies that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, I'm going to assume that those children, for a large part, especially those who were abused by clergy, were groomed. Now, you make a point in your article that the target group, and I've talked about this too, the target group for a number of predator priests has shifted from minor boys to seminarians.
Yes.
And I have noticed this as well, just anecdotally to people that I've talked with. And what I thought was profound about your writing here is that, because I'm looking at the psychology of priests, Catholic priests, and their willingness to accept abuse. And what I mean by abuse is I've talked to a number of priests and I haven't talked to any priests recently who are happy with their superiors or their bishops. They all believe, that their superior bishop would throw them under the bus immediately, that their bishops don't support them. And oftentimes their bishops are abusive towards them. And what I mean by abusive is, it's kind of, and you talk about gaslighting in the article. It's like having an abusive father or neglectful father. The father just doesn't care. He's self-centered. He's mainly concerned about himself. He doesn't support you. He doesn't affirm what you're doing. It goes on. And I even to the point where priests are told to be quiet. God forbid if a priest ever raises any issue in his own diocese about fellow priests or anything that's going on. Bishops don't want to hear anything. They don't want a problem. They want everything to kind of stay at the parish level. When I talk to priests who have such a dysfunctional relationship with their bishop, and are fearful of their bishop, because specifically I'm talking about the ones who have seen certain abuses and have talked about, or have talked to their bishop about it. They know that their vocation, is hanging by a string, and the bishop can, number one, make an accusation against them, can remove them from the priesthood, take away their faculties, laicize them. So there's this fearful, sort of terrorized relationship with their bishop. And I was kind of like, where does this come from, and what? Because I've told priests that I said, Father, leave. I couldn't put up with this. It's very it's not good for your mental health. And I think that's why a lot of priests have psychological problems. But I was trying to figure out why they're this way, why they submit themselves to abuse in this abusive relationship with their bishop and with their with the church and with the superior. And
I can answer that.
Okay, I kind of think, I'm sorry to take up so much time. Sure. I kind of think it has to do with abuse in the seminary, that it started there, that this grooming process and gaslighting, and it starts in the seminary, because you talked about this, and I think it was with the Gorgia case, but you talked about it in several instances where seminarians were scared because they thought they were going to lose their vocation. So it's that fear is instilled in priests in the seminary. Sorry to be so verbose.
Well, they are afraid, and the perfect case study for that involves Richard Biernat from Buffalo.
Yes, I know. Yes.
Remember when Father Art Smith came on to him and he reported to Bishop Grosz. Grosz again threatened to send him back to Poland if he spoke about the abuse that he experienced from Art Smith, who was Grosz's classmate in the seminary. So Biernat thought if he kept quiet, he could be ordained, and he could just get on with his life and not have to worry about this. Well, of course, he was ordained, but then he because he was young and good looking and handsome, Malone made him his secretary, and then when Biernat saw that Malone's covering up all this abuse, just like he covered up his abuse from Father Art Smith, then he went to the media and then blew it up. And then Malone's relieved, but then the last thing that Malone does as he's walking out the door is he suspends Biernat. So these priests, you're right. It starts, they're in the seminary, but they think that they can make it through. But even then, they're kind of naive to believe that even if they're ordained, it's not necessarily going to stop there. They're still going to be at risk. But you see, a lot of them keep quiet because, remember, priests don't have a lot of financial security. In other words, if they get rid of you, unless you or someone like, for example, like Father James Altman, who was a lawyer before he became a priest, right? Yeah. You don't have a job to fall back on, right? You don't have a net to catch you. So and your pay is meager. So what do you do with a degree in philosophy or in theology? That and you'll be lucky to get a job, flipping burgers at a McDonald's with those degrees, right? So it's because the priests are basically kept poor that they're threatened, because you see, if I didn't have my military retirement, I probably would have ended up going off to that prison in the middle of nowhere, because I felt, well, hold it, otherwise I'm going to be living on the street. And what do I do with my theology degree? But only because I had a military retirement, I didn't have to be poor. I didn't have to live in the street. I felt, look, I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to do something else with my life. So most of those priests today are out there, if they're abused by their bishops or passed over because of somebody else or this or that, A lot of them will stay because they don't feel they have other alternatives. I have priests who bishops have gotten rid of who are now working in grocery stores, who are driving trucks, and doing all these things just to survive.
There's also beyond, I think more important than the economic, what you say, I think I believe you, it's true. I think beyond the economic ramifications of them like speaking up and being kicked out of the seminary is the spiritual, because these young men are committed to being priests. I mean, in this day and age, just to enter a seminary, especially the ones that become like so much so-called troublemakers or whistleblowers, they believe God has called them. This is what they're
absolutely like
do.
Anthony Gorgia.
Yeah, yes, he's a perfect example. What a brave young man. They believe that they're called by God. I mean, that's a massive responsibility if you believe that. So that's used against them, because you said this in talking about one of the seminaries. They were terrified of being dismissed from the seminary. I don't think they're terrified because they're not going to have a job. They're terrified because they believe God has called them to do this and they have to do it. So I think when you have that sort of, when you have that belief, you're willing to put up with a lot of abuse.
Right. I think particularly,
and that's not
when
healthy.
you're dealing with, see, you have to distinguish, I think, you see, when a seminarian is gotten rid of like Gorgia, he wasn't so much terrified because of financial, because I mean, he's still young. He could still be a doctor, a lawyer, professor, whatever. But you see, if you're a 50-year-old priest or a 60-year-old priest, if you're someone like Paul Kolchik, or Mark White, or these other good priests, who are being gotten rid of and being sidelined and being canceled, as Mel Gibson, referred to them as, then for them, again, unless they have a prior experience, they may have some financial problems that are going to be more threatening at their age, where they can't get a job, as opposed to a young seminarian who gets out maybe if he's still in his 20s.
Yeah, I think a seminarian would be fearful to speak up about any kind of abuse, mental, physical, spiritual, whatever. Yeah, because they feel that they're being called by God. But I think a priest who's already been ordained, especially a middle-aged one, like you described, I think there's a spiritual aspect too. Is that so much of their identity is the priesthood? I mean, they're a priest, their father Joe or whoever. What do you do after that? And I can relate to that headspace, because I remember I was only 30 or 29 when I left the gay community, and so much of my identity was enmeshed with that. So I didn't know how I could leave, because then you kind of wonder who you are, what you did. And I can't imagine a priest putting everything on the line like that, like the good priests that you've talked about, because so much of who they are and who people see them as is the priesthood. Right. Well, you would know about what.
Sure. Well, I think you can only take so much. You see, you can only push a person so far.
Right.
And you see, what happens is when you're someone like Father Altman or Father Mark White, and Father Paul Kolchik, these priests are being suspended unjustly, no grounds. All these things invented. And then remember, in the case of Father Paul Kolchik, what most Catholics in the United States don't know about Father Kolchik is that when Father Kolchik appealed his dismissal by Supich to Rome, because remember, Kolchik was abused twice.
Yeah.
Okay, when Kolchik appealed, this was like 1 in a million cases where the Vatican said, okay, he should be restored to the parish. He was unjustly, because remember, Supich said that he disobeyed him by allowing his parishioners to burn that gay banner that the previous homosexual pastor had hanging in the church. Well, as you know, what Father Kolchak allowed his parishioners to do is in keeping with the teachings of the Catholic Church. If you have a blessed object like a rosary or a holy card, you're not to dispose of it by throwing it in the garbage. You're either to bury it or burn it.
Exactly.
Well, that's what they did. So what Father Kolchak allowed his parishioners to do was in total keeping with the teachings of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. But they still got rid of, Supich still, got rid of him. So these priests who are being canceled, like Kolchak, then again, in his case, when the Vatican said he should be restored, you know what Supich did?
No.
He called him in and says, look, because Supich knew that the Vatican ruled against him and said he should put him back in that parish, right? What did Supich do? He says, I just decided to close the parish. No, and so he'll sell the parish, get the money from that to use it to pay for more abuse victims.
Snake. What an absolute snake. But most priests, if they had a sticky situation like that, they would handle it in the way that is the least likely to draw attention from anybody, namely anybody at the chancery. Priests just know that they don't want to call. If you get a call from a bishop, it sucks. You just don't want it. You just don't want it. Because I've talked with priests that know that certain abuses are taking place. And I'm like, Father, can't you just speak out? And they're like, no, I can't. And because I will lose my priesthood. And
Sure.
I was like, well, is that such a bad thing? And the way they rationalize it in their head, and I get it, is they say, I'm a good priest, and they are. And they say, I'm doing all of these good things for people. I've helped these people, and I brought them closer to God. Am I going to give all that up to make this stand? And they're kind of like, no, I'm not. I'll shut up.
That's exactly what happened to Monsignor Philip Saylor in my own diocese when he testified at an abuse trial, and his honest testimony resulted in the diocese losing the case because he told the truth about when the bishop really knew that Father Luddy was abusing young men. The new bishop at that point, Bishop Hogan was already retired when that trial took place, but the new bishop, Bishop Adametz, because the diocese lost over $1 million in that trial, said to Monsignor Saylor, who was stationed at that point at the most prestigious parish in the diocese, because he was very respected Monsignor, Bishop Adametz sent him out to a church in the middle of nowhere and basically issued him what is called a precept of silence. He said that if Monsignor Saylor were to write or to speak about that trial, he would lose his retirement and would be suspended from the priesthood. Monsignor Saylor went off there, but then retired early, because he could not take, working for this pervert bishop. So when the Pennsylvania grand jury met, and Adametz was called before the grand jury and asked about all the abuse that he was covering up, all he did was take the Fifth Amendment. So in the end, Adametz died in disgrace. Father Monsignor Saylor outlived him and just recently died at the age of 91.
Yeah, I would say the percentage of especially diocesan priests who have knowledge, and I don't mean just abuses of like another priest being rude or a jerk, but have real knowledge of abuse, of financial, sexual, emotional, psychological abuse taking place, spiritual abuse. I would say it's close to 100% that don't say anything because they're fearful.
Oh, I believe so. They're afraid, and because we see, where the bishops and even the Pope, are vindictive, and so they know how the game is played, and they see how other people have been treated, and they know if they speak out, they're going to be treated the same way.
You wrote in this study, and I think all of this fear and this gaslighting starts in the seminaries. You wrote, some seminarians caved into pressure from seminary or church officials not to report sexual misconduct in exchange for ordination.
That's exactly, again, what happened in the case of Biernat. Now, that's exactly what happened in the case of another seminarian from Baltimore who was drugged and sodomized. And when he reported the sodomy, the archbishop, who was Keeler at the time, appointed an investigator who was an abusive priest himself, who said to the young man, look, if you keep quiet, we'll ordain you to the diaconate.
Right.
Well, he was ordained to the diaconate. But then when they found out that he shared what happened to him with a friend who worked at the Polish embassy, they feared that they might be prosecuted for covering up abuse. So they got rid of him and gave him a one-way ticket back to Poland.
You write here, seminarians are not provided any particular protections under the Catholic Church's Code of Canon Law, and as such, are entirely dependent upon their bishops and seminary superiors for advancement to ordination.
Exactly. And that's what happens in all of these cases that I'm dealing with now, with Gorgia, with that priest, with that seminarian who was sodomized, with the seminarian who was approached up in Rhode Island, the other one who was approached in Baltimore. I mean, there's so many in Buffalo. I can give you case after case after case to support that position. That's
messed up. That's just so messed up, because I remember I lived in LA for a little while, and this is post my conversion. And I met a guy who he had some friends. He was very involved in the Catholic Church. I was too, but he knew some guys at St. John's Seminary in Camarillo. And he was like, oh, Joe, I'm going to go for a day. I think I don't know what the deal was, but we were going to be visitors for the day. I think he was thinking about entering the seminary. And I talked to one seminarian, and he said that, because at that time I was pretty red pilled, and I was like, what's it like here? I knew that place was a den of vipers. And he was like, well, one of the spiritual directors, who was a priest there at the seminary, asked him about his sexual fantasies in their discussions. And I was like, no, that's sick. I don't, what's the reason that he's asking you about your sexual fantasies? And it's like, well, if you want to be, and a lot of them called themselves submariners, and they were like, well, we're below the surface, we're conservative and we know this is bunk, but after ordination, we're gonna change the church. We're gonna reform the church. God bless these guys. They were young and idealistic. But I was like, you have to put up with this in order to become a priest? This is sick. Well, and that's the sad part, because they feel, and I really feel particularly for the younger seminarians, not the delayed vocations who are in their 30s and 40s. I'm really concerned for the straight young ones, because they, in today's environment, will not be able to have any of the mentoring experiences and so forth that I had. So, going back to psychology 101, we all have a basic human need to love and to be loved. But that basic need for a lot of young priests today, I think, is going to be very hard to realize, especially when all the problems that were caused by the gay priest, which have put in all these barriers to between them and young people, they won't have the mentoring experiences that I had, which were very fulfilling, And I think psychologically that's going to be a challenge for them. I think then if they meet a young woman who they're attracted to, or is maybe attracted to them, with the possibility of getting married, having a family, is going to be a greater temptation for them under those circumstances. I wanted to show you something. I've kept you too long. I wanted to show you something real quick. I actually read the McCarrick report from the Vatican. I'm absolutely crazy. So I think it was like 400 odd pages. And there was one page that I keep going back to. I think it was page 75, because even they couldn't make this smell good. They just couldn't. Let's see. So, okay, this is page 73 from the McCarrick report. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit here. Okay, shortly after his return to Metuchen, Priest 4 went to see Monsignor Gambino to tell him what McCarrick had done to him. This is a priest who had been sexually abused by Colonel McCarrick. Expecting to receive support, Priest 4 recalled Gambino's reaction. I explained what had happened to me, and according to the way he handled it, he treated me like I was somehow at fault for making an accusation. Gambino admonished Priest 4 that he was making serious accusations against the bishop and that he needed to go to counseling or else he may not be ordained. There we go. You can't be ordained if you're not, part of the boys club.
Sure.
Monsignor Gambino arranged for Priest 4 to meet with Father Edward Zogby, S.J., a counselor who was affiliated with Fordham University. After the counseling, which also involved taking Priest 4's confession, Father Zogby wanted to give Priest 4 a hug and then tried to kiss him and grabbed his crotch. That's the way it works.
Well, what was interesting about the whole McCarrick report that I would say 99% of the Catholics failed to understand was that, the McCarrick report was prompted by Archbishop Vigano's accusation that Pope Francis had been covering up for McCarrick. Now, remember, Vigano was never attacking McCarrick. All that was documented. He knew, but the real question, the real point was Francis covering this up? So what Francis did was he turned it around. He tried to make the report about, and he called it the McCarrick report. Well, it really was supposed to be, the Bergoglio Pope Francis report, because he was the one who really was accused. And so when Francis got his attorney, from California to write up this report, his defense attorney, as you know, if you're my defense attorney and you know that I'm guilty, you can't say anything, because you'll be disbarred. So from the very beginning, the fact that Francis commissioned the investigation of himself, got his own attorney who works for the Vatican to do this study, and then to write it up, it was a waste of time. It would be like Bill Clinton having his lawyer investigate accusations that he was carrying on an affair with a White House intern. So, the McCarrick report was not supposed to be about McCarrick. It was supposed to be about Francis. So even remember Richard Sipe, when he turned in all that information to Bishop McElroy, years earlier, the same information that he gave to Benedict that caused Benedict to sideline him, what did McElroy do? And remember, McElroy was legally served the material. So we know that he got it. Well, of course, Francis covered that up. McElroy covered it up, and nothing happened. So no, it's that the McCarrick report was a joke from the very, very beginning. It was, it was an absolute joke.
McElroy is the bishop in San Diego, and he's also, I've written about him because he's also a big pro-LGBT advocate, and he's also a big supporter of James Martin.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I would never apply for faculties here, because I could never, I would have, and they don't want me to apply for faculties here because they know they don't want a whistleblower,
They don't want a man with a conscience and with fortitude. You know what I'm going towards. They don't want a man. They want sheep. They want scared priests. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And that's what they have.
And that's exactly what they have. And unfortunately, the Catholics, because they're under this leadership, they're really being misled. I mean, in other words, if you have a priest and a bishop who sees nothing wrong with giving communion to someone like Biden, who promotes abortion,
and married a same-sex couple,
right? And we have a number of different issues there. But remember too, when it comes to that issue, I'm very, very pro-life. Why? Because same thing with the altar boys. I would value, having a wife and children and not want somebody to harm them. Well, again, if I never had that desire, I may be less inclined to be so pro-life. I'm not saying that a person can't be pro-life if they're homosexuals, but I'm just saying that in some cases it interferes with that psychological need to procreate. So I think that's why a lot of the members of the gay community want to propagate their message through it's their way of propagating. In other words, the whole pro-LGBTQ thing is their way of creating more people like themselves when they don't want to have children and families of their own that way. It's another form of procreation.
Yeah. I wonder, just, I'm going to try to wind down here. Sure. I would wondering if you agree with this. I think that, I would say the majority of priests, if they weren't abused as children, they're abused in the seminary. So I would say the majority of Catholic priests have experienced abuse. And I never really defined or unpacked the term abuse, because I think a lot of it people think physical or sexual abuse, but there's psychological abuse. And you talked about that in your report in terms of gaslighting. And I was gaslit. When my story is kind of weird, I sent you my book, is that when I got out of the gay community and I'd been involved in pornography, it's kind of like, well, what do you do? So I went and worked for these traditional TLM Latin Mass priests in Pennsylvania. And I thought I was really psychologically damaged, and they knew my past, and they invited me back there to live with them and work with them. And right away, I started seeing problems that I thought were abusive, grooming, predation. And I went to one of the priests who I wasn't aware that he was actually involved in predation. And I said, I'm seeing Father so-and-so do this, and it's got me concerned. And he knew my past. He knew all my past. And he said, well, Joe, you were abused by priests, and you experienced this in the gay male community and abuse. So you're seeing this. You're like transferring this on to other people. You see how they use it against you? And I believed it. And I was like, you know what? I started going crazy because I kept seeing this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not really seeing it. It's my mind. I'm seeing things. I'm making it look that way. And as it turned out, I was seeing exactly what I was seeing.
Well, they said the same thing to you. They said to me when I reported Father John Matt Lee to Archbishop O'Brien, saying that, look, he has a problem. He has a live-in boyfriend. This guy needs help. I mean, I'm worried about the sailors he's ministering to. Well, what does O'Brien say to me? Gene, are you homophobic?
See, a priest.
Now, what happened 5 years later? When Father John Matthew Lee was arrested and charged with conduct unbecoming an officer, sodomy, aggravated assault, and failure to inform sex partners that he was HIV positive. What does O'Brien say when he's addressed by the media? He said, I had no idea.
Oh, of course, they always say that.
But he was willing to send me off to a nut house, because, I reported him. In other words, I was the problem for reporting the abuse that he was well aware of, and that he himself probably engaged in himself at different times in his life. I pity so many of these priests who have to work for some of these people who are really just living in the closet, enjoying the good life, and lying, and it's really sad. I really pity a lot of these priests.
I want to talk real quick at the end of our conversation. I could talk to you all day. This is an open letter to Catholic media complicit in the cover-up of sexual abuse. I'm sorry to, wow, because I read this and I was like, dang, you don't pull any punches. You wrote because I've had this beef for a long time, because this issue that I've tried to raise, try to get the mainstream Catholic media to cover it. Forget it. Because then they'll lose. They're kind of in the same sort of position that seminarians and priests are in. They're afraid. They're afraid that they're gonna. I mean, the priests
upset
and
their benefactors.
Right, exactly. The seminarians are afraid they won't be ordained. The priests are afraid they're going to be laicized, and the mainstream Catholic media afraid they're going to lose access. So they shut up. It's this toxic environment. You wrote, the Lord has given journalists the mandate of reporting the truth, but Catholic media outlets squander this gift every time they cover up the behavior of countless accused priests and bishops by whitewashing the face of the vocation crisis. I'm writing to request that you abstain from receiving the Eucharist until you confess and receive absolution for deceiving Catholic readers and endangering vulnerable seminarians. Wow.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna sign that Monsignor, Eugene Thomas Gomulka, STL, but I because I never asked to be made a Monsignor. I always, even when they made me a Monsignor, I still would tell people, don't call me Monsignor. I like the title Father better. It's much more paternal, much more scriptural. But when I wrote that piece to the journalists and the editors, I was tempted to use my canonical Monsignor title there.
That is one of the reasons why. I mean, I left the Catholic Church because I tried for 20 years to try to help reform the church from the inside. And I finally realized that it's impossible.
Well, it's even more difficult now, under the Francis pontificate, because it's only getting worse, and it's hard. I pity bishops like Strickland, and others who are trying to do the right thing, and then when they hear people, like Cardinal Marx in Germany, saying that the catechism is all screwed up, and really it needs to get with it today and accept homosexual behavior. Well, how does that? I can only imagine how that affects good bishops like Strickland.
It is not a serious religion.
Well, yeah, and it's if you look statistically too, if you'll note in my report, I noted how the church attendance has been affected, by this whole crisis, which continues to go on. Unlike people who want to say that it's all over, but remember, the largest denomination in the United States today is the Roman Catholic Church. The second largest denomination in the United States are people who were baptized Catholics and fallen away. The third largest denomination, which is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, are the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, there are 30 million fallen away Catholics, former Catholics. There are 15 million Southern Baptists. So the fallen away Catholics make up twice the number of the largest Protestant denomination. What does that tell you? Now, if you were the CEO of McDonald's Corporation, and if you look at how many churches are closing year after year, week after week, if let's say 40% of all of your McDonald's throughout the world are closing now, I dare say that you might be removed from office. But the bishops, they gather in Washington. Why is it that they never really address seriously all the church closures, the drastic decline in vocations, and why is that never discussed? Why? Because they know the problem, and the problem is them.
Exactly.
They are the problem.
Yeah, and those I think those numbers are kind of a mirage, because what the bishops have done is they've imported new Catholics because they've abused the people here in the United States. So they bring in new people to abuse, and eventually they'll get tired and they'll leave too. And then I don't know where they're going to get the next group, because Catholicism is cratering in Latin America too. They just did a study. It's the largest Catholic country in the world. Brazil is about to become not the largest Catholic country in the world. It's not going to be predominantly Catholic anymore.
Well, and it's inevitable when you consider what's going on, and so the real problem is that when you have people who don't really have supernatural faith, who are in this for not the right reasons, and when you have the good people who really feel called by God, to follow, in Christ's footsteps, when these are the people who are being gotten rid of and sidelined and being canceled. It doesn't make for a very good future in my mind for the Catholic Church.
The leadership in the church is also middling. They're not anything extraordinary. I've always said that in the real world, they wouldn't make it, the leadership, because I've talked to priests a lot about being, well, you would know this too, because you knew it. You talk about being in the seminary with future bishops, princes of the church, and I've talked to priests, and I was in the seminary with Bishop so-and-so, and we all knew that they were going to rise up the altar. They were picked out and groomed very early on. And I was trying to figure out and I've talked to some of these priests, what it was. They were very obedient.
Well, and they're very good at cover-ups. Remember, in 1985, when Father Tom Doyle published his report on sex abuse in the United States, that was covered up by the Vatican and all the U.S. bishops, he was shown the door of the Vatican embassy. But the two priests that replaced him, one after another, who sat at the same desk, received all the abuse reports that he was receiving, but instead of reporting them, they covered them up, were none other than Timothy Dolan and Blaise Supich. So Tom Doyle's report for being honest and reporting the abuse and trying to get the bishops to do something to avert it, is thrown out. The priests who covered it all up are cardinals today in Chicago and New York.
Yep. And I've written to Dolan several times, and this was years ago, because I was trying to figure out, okay, I've got a blatant example of insanity. So there's a priest with faculties incarnated in the diocese, and he gave a lecture that said, he talked about how heterosexual men are not open to receiving God. They're more standoffish. They're not receptive, he said. And he said, well, gay men are more receptive to God and the Holy Spirit sexually as well. And so I sent him the DVD of never responded. And he's done nothing with this priest, and he's done nothing to clamp down on any of this stuff going on in his diocese.
Well, and that's what I learned very, very quickly too in the Gorgia case. I mean, this goes back to his very, very first assignment after he was ordained a priest and was assigned to a parish in St. Louis, where he was stationed with Father Valentine, who was sexually abusing Dennis O'Leary, and Dolan saw O'Leary being brought many times to Valentine's room, and did nothing. And then years later, when Regali, Cardinal Regali made Dolan his auxiliary bishop and put him in charge of abuse, when O'Leary now, years later, now he's in the 30s, goes to Dolan and says, well, look, what are you going to do about, how I was abused after all these about Father Valentine? And of course, Dolan, who's appointed there to cover it all up, says, oh, Tim, I don't know, Father Valentine was a great priest. So again, the bottom line is that these victims are treated, it's just sad. It's very, you can't, and then you understand why all the people are leaving the church.
Yeah. And the way that they treat sex abuse victims is the way they treat seminarians and priests. It's the same exact way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And me being so naive, for years I've gone to these bishops with my hat in my hand and just like, please help. And I've gone with evidence, I've gone with pictures, I've gone with video, everything. And I said, and they don't care. They just don't care.
But again, they don't. I don't know if they've ever had, those feelings that I told you that I had as a young priest towards young people. And if they don't have that, then they can't feel, how evil it is, to treat people this way. And because they wrestle with these problems themselves, and some of them, like as I said, if the Pope really did sodomize that seminarian in Cordoba, why would we be surprised that he then later on covered for Grassi to try to get his 15-year sentence overturned? Or why did he hide Zanchetta, who was just, convicted of abusing those two seminarians, in his seminary? Because he did the same thing. Only the difference was he didn't get caught. They did. But why Joseph has Francis, unlike John Paul II and Benedict, not returned to his native Argentina after all of these years? Why? Because he's afraid of being knocked off. The death threats. Because after all those people, in other words, if you covered up all this abuse, let's say if you're the Pope, okay, and you covered up the abuse of my kid brother or kid sister, okay, and they appealed to you and you did nothing about it, and now I'm dying of cancer, and you're coming back to my native land, what am I going to do? I'm going to go out and get a rifle, and I'm going to learn how to be a sniper, and I'm going to take you out. Because my brother or my sister, their lives are screwed up now. One may have committed suicide, one may be on drugs, the other one may be addicted to alcohol. Their lives were destroyed by the abuse that you tolerated. So that's why Francis has not gone back to Argentina.
Yeah. Well, one last thing, I promise. You included that famous quote from Archbishop Fulton Sheen about the laity reforming the church and not the clergy. What made me pessimistic about that is I see the same kind of gaslighting. And I know social media is weird, but it's the way a lot of people communicate. And when I've tried to expose some sort of abuse in the church, the pushback is from the laity a lot. And I can see where they've been gaslit. And they use the same old stuff. Don't betray Jesus because of Judas. Where will you go? You can't leave the church. It's all this cult mentality that if you leave, you're abandoning God. And I can imagine that kind of plays in the head of same seminarians. Is like they're in these abusive seminaries and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't leave. I can't abandon God. And this is the same argument that the laity uses against people. So that sort of abusive, gaslighting BS has trickled all the way down to the laity. And I'm like, this is not good.
Well, see, that's exactly what happened to the Gorgia family. Here they gave their son, their only son. Maria had 2 miscarriages, and she had a difficult birth with Anthony. Okay, and so you're a good Italian family. You want grandchildren, right? Bambini, allora magari io voglio avere molto famiglia, una grande famiglia. But when their son Antonio said when he was 6 years old, "Mamma, Papa, io voglio diventare un sacerdote. I want to be a priest," being good Catholics, they said, "Okay, we'll support you." And then when all this happened to them, all these people that they, in their parish of Our Lady Star of the Sea, that they welcomed into their homes, that, abandoned them. The same thing happened to a family in Baltimore whose son was abused at John Paul II Seminary and then later on at St. Mary's in Baltimore. The same thing. These parents were very involved in the church, in the lay orders and so forth. And then when their son reported the abuse, and they brought it to the attention, that everybody ran away, and so no, I can see, this is why it's hard for these victims and their families to want to continue to remain in the Catholic Church, not just because of the abuse or the cover-up on the part of the bishops, but also, as you point out, because of how the Catholic laity do not support them. The same thing happened with Anthony Gorge and the Knights of Columbus. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus, in Staten Island, and then they even had his picture, in the Knights of Columbus Hall when he went to Rome to study in Rome. But then when he came back and he appealed to them, look what they did to me, they all ran away. They did nothing. So the Knights of Columbus, even the Supreme Knight in New Haven, Connecticut, did nothing. So you're right. I mean, who wants to be a member? I mean, that's very hard for people to want to stay a part of an organization like that, especially when organizations like the Knights of Columbus and others who profess to be, we want to encourage vocations. The Knights are pushing vocations, but what? You go off to the seminary, you get abused, and you report it, and what do? They let you down. So no, I think you're right. A lot of those Catholic laity and some of those organizations, as well as the media, Catholic media, are a bunch of hypocrites. And I don't want to use those. I can't use those terms on. I spent too many years in the military to be careful about using certain language.
But Gene, thank you so much. I could have talked to you for hours. It personally, it helps me to talk this out because I still haven't figured out what happened or what's going on. It's difficult. It's difficult. I can understand why the Pope and the cardinals and the bishops have done what they have done, because I just think they're all corrupt. Yeah. It's a little more difficult for the priests because I've known so many of them, and they are good men, but they've been terrorized. And the laity, I don't know, except it's brainwashing. But it's.
I think they think that if they speak up, they're going to lose their all those premiums they paid for their eternal life insurance policy are going to be for naught. I mean, who wants to pay all this insurance and then not collect? Yeah, I know. I think their eternal salvation, they're not going to be buried in the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and they're going to go to hell if they speak up. So they have to get that. They have to make sure that they get buried in the Catholic Church. And if they speak up, they're going to jeopardize that. Yeah, people have told me I'm going to hell, and I bet they've told you that too. So. Oh yes, but they're the ones actually I think are going to end up there. I know. Let's pray for them. So I guess it's difficult for me to pray for the church, but I do it on occasion. So. Me too. God bless you, Gene. Thank you. Okay, Joseph, it's a real pleasure being on your program.
It's okay, and it's all right. Don't get up, baby.